Hey there, loyal listeners. Just a quick reminder that we have our Q&A episode coming up, and we need Q's to A. If you'd like to submit a question for our Q&A episode that's going to land in the beginning of February, please go to GenreVision.com, search for the post on the front page that has the Riddler on it. You can comment on that post in the comment section with your question. You can also email us at GenreVisionPod@gmail.com. You can tweet at us at GenreVisionPod. Just get us questions, because we can always use more. We love doing these Q&A episodes, and the more questions we have to answer, the happier we'll be. Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we are diving into the depths of underwater. Before we do that, just a couple calls to action this week. This show is brought to you by our Patreon subscribers. We wanted to say hello to our new Patreon premium subscriber, Andrew. Hello, Andrew. I hope you're listening. Andrew became a subscriber at patreon.com/GenreVision, and for just $5 a month, Andrew's going to get access to all of our awesome bonus content over there, including extended currently consumings. We just did a pre-show banter for this episode that ended up being a little deeper. All that stuff is now Andrew's for just $5 a month. So if that's something you'd like to do, patreon.com/GenreVision.
Amen. All right. That's all.
Let's get into it, because Underwater, this is a movie that Travis and I, we have to be upfront about right out the gate. This particular kind of premise, we're already halfway in on this. Like, it doesn't take much for us to love this kind of a movie. I mean, go listen to our Sphere versus Cube episode, and you can hear some of our love for what Travis was recently calling seafloor movies.
Anything that takes place in like an underwater habitat or like underwater laboratory, whether it's Deep Blue Sea or Sphere or The Abyss or Leviathan, these are our kinds of movies. I'm just a sucker for them. I think a key part of knowing yourself as a consumer of cinema is knowing what you're a total sucker for. And if it takes place in like a laboratory under the sea, I'm fucking there. And Underwater is no exception. I was there for Underwater from the very beginning. As soon as that first trailer hit, I went, oh, Drew and I are going to be really looking forward to this.
Yeah, and we're going to do it on the show. I mean, we're in January, and this is typically considered a dumping month for theatrical releases. And Underwater has I would love to hear the full story on the movie, because this has basically been sitting on a shelf for Fox during the entire buyout from Disney. That, and also because of, I think, one of the cast members, TJ Miller, who we will talk about. I think that just caused a huge negativity around releasing this movie. And it's really just been sitting on a shelf for like 2 years. And finally, Mickey decided to push it out. That sounds awful.
Mickey, I got a push, Drew.
It's terrible. I don't want to stay on that image. And so now Underwater is here, and we've been anticipating this. This was easily already one of my most anticipated movies of the year, because it's our particular brand, of deep horror, of aquatic horror. And more so, I think, because it looked so handsome in all the promotional material. Part of that, I think, is also because the director of photography is Bojan Bazeli, who shot A Cure for Wellness, which I would argue is one of the best looking wide release films of the last decade. Certainly in the horror genre. For sure.
Bojan Bazeli is a master of his craft. And the director of Underwater, a guy named William Eubank, he made a movie a couple years ago called The Signal, which was this indie movie starring, I think, the new young kid from Pirates of the Caribbean 5. I forget his name, Brenton Thwaites or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was asked to review the soundtrack back when I was doing the whole soundtrack reviewing thing for writing. But that's how it kind of first came across my radar. And I had heard that the movie was really, really low budget, but had excellent production value. Lawrence Fishburne is in it. And I remember thinking while watching that movie, oh yeah, this is like really promising, surprisingly stylish, like makes a lot with very, very little. And I think William Eubank, looking at his output from that prior movie, is like, okay, yeah, this is the kind of guy who clearly has taste for these sorts of genre stories. Like, we can put him on this flick and, you know, he'll be a solid choice. Now, I don't know how the Fox executives felt about, you know, Eubank's performance as a director, you know, this being his first real big project. But he brought this in, you know, from what I understand, on an $80 million budget. That's considered a mid-budget movie these days.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the end of the spectrum of mid-budget for today, yeah.
I think it proves, actually, that you can make a fairly good Alien-esque movie, you know, a large budget genre affair, or a large scale genre affair, or a creature feature, big science fiction movie on a mid budget. You don't have to go break the bank on it.
Well, let's also get something out of the way. What is the number one adjective you have seen and dreaded seeing when people have been describing and reviewing this movie?
Derivative.
Yes.
It's derivative.
And here's the thing. Derivative, I think, is not an inherently good or bad descriptor of anything.
People use it, you know, I should say many film critics use it as a negative criticism about a film.
Yes, and that's what we're trying to talk about here, is that I don't think necessarily being derivative is a bad thing. Sometimes it can be.
No art is fully original at the cinemas. Get over it.
Well, and Underwater, I think it's so clear, even from the promotional material and what we saw of the premise, that, yeah, this is a riff on Alien. And after seeing the full movie, it's obvious that the movie is aware of that. It leans into its inspirations gleefully.
Yeah.
And I think is a better movie for it.
Sure, it celebrates its influences, and I think it does a good job of celebrating those influences. You know, it's not doing them, you know, half-assed. It's really going for it in, I think, every aspect of its homage aesthetic. I mean, it really is very, very Alien. You know, you see these sets where characters are standing around underlit from computer screens and tables with maps on them and things like that. It's like, oh, this is so freaking Ridley Scott. This is so original Alien, and, you know, definitely brings to mind Prometheus and Alien Covenant in its sort of more realistic approach or more grounded approach to using current technology and all the panels and displays, just like building the sets in a believable way. But the movie is also very heavily art directed. You know, the first costume that we see the main character in, Nora, who's played by Kristen Stewart, she's in like gray sweatpants and a brassiere. And the brassiere is not just like any off the rack bra. Like, it's a very specific design that, you know, makes you believe that this is a slightly heightened reality. I don't mean to be paying so much attention to Kristen Stewart's brassiere, but like when your costume design is sort of stripped down to that minimum, it forces you to focus on the details.
Well, and even in the costuming, I think across the board, there is that kind of what Ridley Scott described as truckers in space type idea. This is the same thing here in Underwater. These are supposed to come off as working class blue collar looking people in terms of their design. But what I love about Underwater in this regard is that Ridley Scott's Alien and the art direction and the production design of that movie went on to influence, I think, a lot of 80s and 90s anime. And now Underwater comes back around, and I think it's taking influence from the 80s and 90s animes that were then influenced by Alien. It's this wonderful cyclical bit of stylistic influence that is so awesome in Underwater. I love every bit about the production design and art direction of this movie.
Without any spoilers, the setup for Underwater is extraordinarily simple. The premise is that the Mariana Trench, the deepest spot in the ocean, is now used as a drilling field. And there's this one company, you know, Tion Industries or something like that has set up a whole bunch of drilling platforms down, you know, 7 miles deep in the ocean. And so you have a whole bunch of characters who are staying on this one rig called the Kepler. And early on in the film, there is some sort of incident that happens where a whole bunch of tunnels collapse on the Kepler and the entire station is destabilized, and you have a small crew of people that now have to escape this partially collapsed underwater station and make their way across the seafloor in hopes of getting to a rig that hasn't collapsed. I forget what they call that one. The Roebuck, sorry. So they get, the idea is they'll get to the Roebuck through all these different various steps, and there will be escape pods for them to get up to the surface.
And of course, if you know anything about the movie, don't worry, there are monsters that are going to impede their journey.
Yeah.
That's all we'll say about the plot for now. I have to get back to the design of this movie because we knew this going in from the material that we saw in the advertisements and in the finished movie. I'll say it again. This is a masterfully tactile movie in production design and art direction and everything. This is a movie where I would say for the most part, nothing ever felt fake to me in terms of the stage that they were shooting on, or even some stuff with the monsters later on. But specifically the spaces that they were in, because a lot of these spaces are fully built sets. Remember those? I felt inside the movie because of all of this. And I felt like I just wanted to run my hands over every bit of tech and engineering in that movie. It is awesome.
Yeah, they do a good job of varying the interiors, even though it's all sort of like cramped submarine type spaces. They do a good job of varying the look of one room to another room.
Well, and I love the fact that Tian Industries is a presence in the movie because they have all these hokey motivational posters everywhere.
Yeah, some of those are put to really good use later on in the film. We'll get there.
Sure. And the intercom is constantly saying these, welcome to the station, blah, 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 and is being really, and I immediately think of Mother and even a father from Alien Resurrection, which I think is even a more apt usage of it because it's very comedic how it's used in underwater.
This to me felt more like a subtle satirical element because it was spouting all sorts of weird corporate propaganda, like almost like marketing speak to its employees.
Well, the whole, it's like, when you're here, you're not an employee, you're family, that kind of, which you hear all the time.
Garbage, bullshit, nonsense, yeah.
Yeah, but I liked it added a little bit more to the world because this is taking place in some kind of nondescript, not too distant future. And that comes into play a lot, I think, the not too distant future bit with one of the best things. This is you and me here, Travis. One of the best things about the movie are the suits that they have to walk around in for the majority of the running time. These suits are so anime and so bulky and fun, and I love these suits more than I think I can describe.
They're perfect. I mean, they are the best space suits on film since Prometheus, and they're better than the ones in Prometheus.
So much better.
They have like the Nostromo approach where it's like this big BioShock style dive suit. It's really quite wonderful to look at. And you actually get later on a riff on an older looking one with a different color scheme. And it's like, man, this is scratching this itch that I have, this itch that has gone unscratched in popular cinema for so fucking long, Drew. I can't tell you how long it's been since a movie has properly scratched that itch, and this movie's doing it.
Yeah, I love that you're saying when we get the older suit, it's like, oh, okay, this is again a little bit of world building and showing us how things have evolved without directly stating to us that the suits are so a specific era of anime that I, kind of like Ghost in the Shell, where everything's still got, bulky cylinders on it that look like something important, or I love everything about that in the movie. But I think something, and this won't get into spoilers just yet, but talking about the framework of the movie, this movie's 90 minutes and change, and it's a movie that really goes from the beginning. There is maybe a minute or two of introduction after the credits, which the credits are doing a lot of heavy lifting. I'll give them that.
Yeah, it's kind of a riff on the Gareth Edwards Godzilla credits where
Right.
it's like, redacted documents and newspaper articles and press releases, and they're highlighting things that they want you to see.
But that's fine.
It's pretty much directly that.
I'm okay. I don't think that's lazy. I think that is a method that you can use in modern movies for these kind of things where it's like, well, if we're going to have, I was kind of shocked because I was watching, I'm like, oh, right, opening credits in a movie.
Sure, yeah.
We don't get that anymore.
But remember Sphere's opening credits? It was all just sort of like mood and atmosphere. This, this tells you actual text information on the screen. It's a little bit above getting like a text crawl of the year is 20XTX in the Tian Industries Corporation.
Sure, the dead speak. But it was still opening credits. Like I was like, oh, I'm so programmed now to see cast members' names at the end of a movie that this looks like an end credits sequence. So I was like, oh, yay, opening, like the music setting a mood, even though we are getting information, there is a tone being set here. And then the movie introduces us to Kristen Stewart's character, Nora, and then the earthquake happens and stuff goes down, and the movie pretty much doesn't stop from there. And I'll say this. I think that is incredibly beneficial for this kind of movie, that it starts right away and never really lets up. There's never a big chunk of downtime for the movie. And that can be a problem. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more specifically when we get into spoilers. But as far as pacing is concerned, I think this movie, I think it will come off as breakneck to a lot of people, but for me, it kept me hooked and invested all the way through, and I think a big part of that was the pacing.
It's clearly trying to be a breakneck movie. Like, that is its mission statement, is to, from the very beginning, go, 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 do, do, do. There are moments for breath in the film, but for the most part, it is about overcoming an obstacle as quickly as possible, and then moving on to the next obstacle. There are times where you get to sort of sit around with the characters and just sort of hang out with them a little bit for a few scenes and get a chance to just sort of see what they're like when they're not running and screaming. And
but the thing is that the movie is doing those while it's still they're always in the process of continuing their journey while we're learning something about them. And this is, I know I've talked about this on the show before, but it's a philosophy that I learned about listening to the commentaries for Lost.
Yeah, shoot the computer.
Shoot the computer, exactly. This is an entire movie whose thesis is shoot the computer, which, for anybody who doesn't know, shoot the computer is basically when you have a whole bunch of exposition or getting to know a character, instead of just sitting down and having that be done and doling it out kind of regularly, center your scene around an event that is causing trouble for the characters, and they have to learn something while trying to fix this problematic event. That is the entirety of Underwater.
Right. Because of the setting of the film, every problem is urgent. And they sell the urgency by having the initial collapse of the Kepler be extraordinarily harrowing and violent. There is one scene where Kristen Stewart's Nora has to run down a corridor. She meets up with a coworker of hers, a guy that she doesn't know very well, played by an actor, Mamadou Athie. And in their brief conversation, they're discussing how to prevent the collapse from continuing, but they look down the corridor, which, by the way, is nightmarishly warping and shaking and twisting like a noodle. And there are two people running down the corridor towards them as the tunnel is collapsing behind them. And they're waiting and waiting, waiting to see if these other people are going to get there. And no, they have to shut the doors that are going to seal that particular corridor. And so it gives these characters something to do that is urgent. They are shouting their dialogue at one another. Not all of the dialogue is intelligible. We'll get there because that's a kind of a sticking point for me, but you get a sense of like what drives these characters, what is their philosophy, you know, are they the kind of people that will just seal the door and say fuck whoever is on the other side, or are they going to wait till the last moment? You know, so you're learning about who these characters are and what their philosophies are, how they feel about other people, through action and movement.
Well, even earlier in that scene when they meet up and they're trying to fix something or find out something in the computer room, and the other coworker asks Nora, like, are you a computer engineer? And she's like, oh, mechanical. And it's like, oh, okay, like we're doling out this information, but it's while there is action going on. And the action is fairly ceaseless, but we do have to acknowledge something here, because it's something you and I talked about, in that because of this frenetic and frantic pacing and mood of the movie, the edit of the movie reflects that. It's
a really frenetic edit, and it's a very kinetic filmmaking style. Lots and lots and lots of camera movement.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it, I think, works to the film's advantage, like that camera movement. And then there's some of the camera movement that doesn't quite suit the film's motivations, I think. You know, and it's even stuff like there's a scene where Vincent Cassel's character, he plays the captain of the Kepler.
Yeah, Captain Lucian.
He's standing around, there's a big table in front of him, and there's a map of the seafloor on the table. And he's like, we're going to start here, we're going to go to this place called Midway Station, and then we're going to finally make our way to the Roebuck. And while he's moving his pointer across the map, the camera is whoosh, 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 whooshing around with his pointer finger. And I'm just like, cut it out. Stop. You can get this kind of information to us without sort of having everything be kinetic.
I don't disagree, but I don't find that an issue when I think it's built into the framework of the movie from the script, because we have to be honest here. We had one of our biggest complaints about Rise of Skywalker had to do with the briskness of the edit and how it affected the narrative and the information that we as the audience were being told. That same kind of approach is being utilized here in Underwater, but because it is built into the framework of the movie from the script, I don't think it's that much of an issue. It's present. I will not disagree there, but it was never something that took me out of the movie or made me feel like I was confused or unaware of what was going on. I felt I kept up with the movie at the pace it wanted me to.
Sure, and I think the big difference between something like Rise of Skywalker and Underwater is that Rise of Skywalker is trying to do a lot of things.
Right, it's dense as fuck.
Exactly, and deliver on a lot of things in a 2.5 hour period. Whereas Underwater is like, this is a knowingly slight movie with not a whole lot of plot going on. It's not twisty, it's not turny, it is refreshingly straightforward, and it wants to get to the point, but it wants to really rattle you along the way. And one of the movies that this is going to draw comparisons to, and I actually don't know why it's not drawing more comparisons to this, is Gravity. Gravity is much the same way, where it's about a crew of people in an isolated location and a disaster happens. And it centers on a woman protagonist who is isolated, who has a sad backstory, and it is go, 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 go. I mean, you get a brief few minutes with them before the action hits, and then shit hits the fan, and the movie goes and goes and goes, and it's going from one place to another. So it's clear to me that the second screenwriter on this, Adam Kozad, took structure from Gravity and said, this is how I want the film to be paced.
So, before we dive into spoilers and more plot stuff, I do want to stay technical, because everything tactile, like I said, about this movie is great. And that includes Bazzelli's cinematography. I think this movie looks so handsome.
This looks so fucking good.
Sometimes gorgeous.
Yeah, the interiors especially just sing to me. I mean, it's such my shit. So heavily my shit. The exteriors take a different approach, because evidently the director, William Eubank, wanted all of the exterior underwater stuff to be really heavy, with the level of like cloudy silt in the water. Mm-hmm. And this is even apparent like when they're doing the big moving camera shot down the rig to show you just like how long it is, like how big the Kepler is and how deep it goes. Like it's pretty clear that they didn't want crystal clear water. They wanted a lot of particulate matter, a lot of floating motes, marine snow falling through the water. And yeah, it does add that sort of texture and that depth that we would need for it not to look just like space, or a void. It gives you the sense that there's some sort of depth there, some sort of volumetric thing filling the space.
That's impressive because this is a movie where the characters are literally in void spaces, and I never felt the void space feeling that we get, that we've talked about on the show many a time. I always felt that the characters were in a place, a real place. The things around them, they were interacting with them, sometimes for great effect and horror. I think I can see that element of the movie when they're out in the water with the combination of the camera language and just the visual decision to make things dark and murky and muddy, that could be disorienting to some people. I would say unintentionally disorienting, because there are times when the movie is intentionally trying to disorient the audience to put you into the terror that the characters are feeling. And I think it's really successful at that.
How many times in the movie does a character say, "I can't see shit," or "I can't see you"? It's something clearly that the movie knew that it had to do was create a lot of obscurity in the exteriors. They wanted the characters to have a hard time seeing so that we would feel disoriented.
And to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Like, it had to acknowledge that, being a movie that's, in one of the deepest points on the earth that we know of, it can't be crystal clear. It had to look, I think that's a big success. But when it comes to a big criticism about the movie, before we get into plot stuff, I think you and I do share a big criticism, and that is in the sound mix for this movie.
Yeah, I would be so bold as to say that the sound mix on this movie flat out sucks.
It's not good. My biggest complaint about the sound mix, because you were, we alluded to not being able to hear certain parts of the dialogue and stuff, and I certainly had that happen. One of my thoughts was like, I can't wait to watch this again with subtitles,
please.
But I never felt that I missed anything crucial dialogue-wise as far as the plot or important character interactions. Anything like that, I felt I came across. However, there were plenty of lines that I was not able to pick up, and it was less to do with the specific recording of the line as it was often the other elements in the sound mix, sound effects, and the score. The score, I think, is a big culprit when it comes to the sound mix, because the actual score isn't bad, and towards the end of the movie that was doing some stuff I really liked.
Sure.
But it is so front-loaded and heavy in the mix that a lot of times it drowns out everything else that I'm hearing.
Yeah, the score was composed by Marco Beltrami and Brandon Roberts. Brandon Roberts is a guy who frequently works with Marco Beltrami. He's just sort of part of his team. And yeah, the music removed from the film is not bad music. I don't have a problem with how the music is composed. What I have a problem with is like how fucking loud it is in the mix all the time. You and I think were remarking about Jaws. Like I did a Jaws rewatch a bunch of weeks ago, and I was like, there's way less music in this movie than I seem to remember. There are certain scenes where I thought, surely the music would be pounding. Nope. And I think that movie could have, I think Underwater could have used that approach a little bit more of like, actually, let's remove the music entirely from the scene and see how it plays out.
Because that does happen at certain points.
It certainly does. I think they could have done more of that.
Yeah, I don't disagree. That's what I was going to, is like when it dropped out, of course, that is kind of modern horror telegraphing of like, get ready, something's going to on the screen somehow. And that certainly happened. But I liked, there was a moment where two characters went out and they were being monitored by other people inside the facility, and there was no score, and we just heard the ambient noise of the water around them and stuff. It was like, yeah, why isn't there more of this? Because this is really good.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, all the sort of other ambient elements of the mix are very, very loud as well. This sort of creaking and groaning and banging and, the sense that this place is constantly on the verge of collapse. Like they wanted to push that forward in the mix. And I get the sort of intended effect. It's to pile on, pile on, pile on, really put pressure on the audience. But in some crucial moments, I think it's the sound mix's job to back off. Even when the things the characters are saying aren't entirely vital to understanding the story of the film, the story is exceptionally simple. I don't need to understand every single line of dialogue to get what's going on. It's not a confusing film. But when there's dialogue going on that I can't understand, I immediately am going to feel it at a distance. I'm going to feel like there's either something wrong with me or something wrong with the movie. And one of the movies that sort of takes a similar approach to pacing and a similar approach to how it uses dialogue is Mad Max Fury Road. And if you listen very closely to Mad Max Fury Road, especially in that first 25 minutes of the film, they work a lot of really beautiful exposition and world building into the dialogue, where characters are using very specific jargon and things like that, where the meaning of it is not necessarily something that it takes time to explain and define, but the dialogue often was re-recorded and mixed especially for clarity. Max will be whispering something under his breath, but it sounds like it's, Tom Hardy with his mouth right next to the microphone, delivering it with utter crystal clarity. I remember there's a scene where Nux gets his blood transfusion and he's, high octane blood filling me up. And it's like they're making really, really concerted efforts to make sure the dialogue is crystal clear, understandable. You can see the actor's lips moving. That also adds to dialogue clarity.
Yeah, so all of that, before we got to talk about cast before we get into spoilers. It's an exceptionally small cast. I think there's only 7 credits to the movie. And most of that we spend with about 5 people. Of course, the lead being Kristen Stewart, who is so perfect in this role. A role that if you were asking me to cast it, I wouldn't have thought of her. I think she's a little unconventional, and that's perfect for this particular role. There's obviously big Ellen Ripley energy here, but Nora as a character is set up at the beginning with a really interesting scene and voiceover. There is voiceover that bookends the movie, which I'm a little squiffy on.
The opening voiceover is not too bad because it's not so blatantly expository, and it's a little bit mysterious about what she's talking about. And it actually opens us up to her philosophy. Like, I felt the voiceover was kind of artfully written.
The opening, yes. I think the closing one was we'll get to that. But
yeah, a little clumsier. But
Kristen Stewart, I think, is really good and solid in the movie. I think the entire cast is really solid. This is a good ensemble.
John Gallagher Jr. coming back and doing another, good performance, an understated performance, like delivering everything that performance needs. Like, after 10 Cloverfield Lane, I'll watch that. Actually, no, screw that. After Short Term 12, I'll watch that fucker in anything.
He was great in Hush.
Of course, yeah.
Again, like small, like he's a secret weapon of an actor.
He does pretty much everything the scene needs and the character needs without overstepping any sort of bounds or doing any capital B, capital A, big acting.
Another cast against type here, Vincent Cassel is not a creeper. He's actually incredibly optimistic as the captain, and he's kind of hearty. I liked him in the role.
He's a good dude, yeah.
And Jessica Henwick is Emily. She is kind of our Veronica Cartwright to make an Alien comparison in this.
Constantly worried, constantly scared.
Yeah.
Not as immediately capable.
But I think she plays the role well. I don't think she actually doesn't devolve into the histrionics that Cartwright became infamous for.
No, but I mean, like, granted, Alien, there's a lot of histrionics from pretty much everybody on that movie,
after a certain point.
Yeah, the yelling and screaming gets a little too real in that movie sometimes, where it's like, Ridley, what were you doing to these poor people?
But we have to obviously address the elephant in the room, T.J. Miller in the cast.
Yeah, this was made before his cancellation.
Yes, and you said to me after you saw it, you were like, this is the most restrained T.J. Miller character that's ever been on the screen. He's still T.J. Miller. Don't you worry. Ugh.
His first line sucks.
His first line is horrendous, and I can't believe they allowed that to stay in.
Uh-huh.
But otherwise, I'm gonna climb up on that stake myself, and y'all can get your torches out if you want. I actually think T.J. Miller's pretty good in this.
He's fine in the movie. I mean, the role calls for a certain sort of thing, and I'm sure there's 100, 50 blown takes of him where it's just like, yeah, we're definitely not going to use that, improv line in the movie. So
sure,
it takes a really good editor to make a good performance. So think about that when you're watching a really, really great performance, and then think, oh, right, there's an editor, somebody who had to actually go through and choose all of these good takes and stitch together. Yeah. So it's a matter of what to keep and what to throw away. Who knows? Maybe there's 17 hours of utter garbage from T.J. Miller in the dailies.
We can only hope. But all right, let's dive past the spoiler wall and get into this, because we got to talk about monsters, baby.
Here be monsters.
Yes, and holy moly, I really enjoyed how this movie doled out its creatures. It's a clear understanding of escalation for your villain.
Yeah, and just like everything else in the movie, they try to do a lot of these beats as quickly and as with as much brevity as possible. I wish they had held back on that, because that's, again, one of my biggest complaints about this movie. It's just racing through everything. They do, however, spend a really nice little scene with a practical creature that, has a little bit of CGI enhancement, but they grab this baby monster from outside this underwater elevator. They bring it inside, and then they put it on the table, and they do the classic, like, hey, let's poke at it with a pen scene.
Yep. I love that little baby. I love its. I'll say this has got to be one of the hardest PG-13s I've seen in a while. This movie gets nasty.
People die hard.
Even before we see monsters, one of the characters implodes, and we see it.
Yeah, his fucking helmet cracks as soon as they open up an airlock, and his whole shit implodes because it's 7 miles.
It's incredible, and I was like, well, that's already pretty net, because they have him full center frame when he implodes, and then afterwards we see like his hand bumps on Nora's helmet, and like another chunk of viscera gets on there. There's blood that they're walking through the water. I was like, this is gnarly.
It's gross. Yeah. I mean, it's this pretty fantastic thing where, like, his suit obviously is under pressure. There's a lot of positive pressure from air inside his suit. So when he implodes, there's this big, like, cavitation bubble of expanding air that pushes outward, and it actually pushes everybody else out of the airlock amidst this big cloud of blood and gore. Naturally, because it's PG-13, the blood can't be too red, because evidently the redness of blood is something that the MPAA pays a lot of attention to. But yeah, there's TJ Miller's death is particularly gruesome. There is a short shot of his head and jaw deforming right before he is yanked out of his suit, basically, and his head explodes. And
the blood just fills the entirety of the helmet. But I do want to get back to you when you were talking about the monsters. I really liked how they built up the monsters in this, because when they're out and they think they're getting attacked earlier, they look up and you can see that there is like a figure on the structure.
They're looking up through this porthole, and throughout the first 15 or so minutes of the movie, they're thinking, okay, the nuclear core of the Kepler is going to explode. We have to leave. They look up through the porthole, and there's a big explosion above them as the nuclear core of the Kepler goes. And in the glow of the explosion, you see the silhouette of the monster looking in through the porthole. It's like, ooh, hey there.
Well, and then when they leave that section, and they're trying to get back into another part of the station, you can see the silhouette of another one of the figures. And probably my favorite setup shot is they all have to go one by one in through this little underground tunnel, and TJ Miller's the last one, and behind his shoulder, out of focus, there is a flashing red alarm light, and we just see the silhouette of something moving back there.
Yeah, it put me right back in the sort of water tunnel scenes from Aliens.
Mm-hmm.
It did a really great job of evoking that kind of stuff and quoting that sort of stuff without cheapening it. That's the really crucial thing here, is that when you're going to do these homages, when you're going to pay homage to something as great as those scenes, and you're going to evoke the texture of it, you don't want to cheapen it. You don't want to seem like a rip-off version or a low-rent version of whatever it is you're saying that you love. Instead, this movie does it, I think, with a tremendous amount of love apparent in every shot.
Oh yeah, I mean it's so clear that there is a genuine adoration for Alien and these kind of movies, and the monsters I think are used really well. You know, there's my favorite thing about them, I think, and this is just in general with monster stuff, is when they have these reflective eyes and they're just these little tiny white beads.
They do a great job with that, as like the monsters are kind of barely just outside the beam of their flashlights on the exterior. So you'll see the flashlight move and then it'll be a little tiny, almost like replicant eyes sort of thing. You know, you'll see it a little bit and then it'll go right out of frame.
It made me think of another recent aquatic horror movie, Sweetheart.
Yeah.
Where she finds the photo.
I will have to say, I think Sweetheart has the better monster reveal shot.
Well, oh yeah.
Particularly because it lasts longer. I mean, Sweetheart has a much different approach to like letting shots linger, whereas in Underwater, the primary philosophy is fucking race through it all.
Well, I didn't mean to bring this up to start a comparison to Sweetheart, but you know, as far as quality, but I really like the way the monsters are slow. There is a slow reveal to the monsters throughout that we see. Every time there's a scene with them, we see a little bit more of them.
Sure.
And that's really textbook good use of your monster. And when things finally hit the fan and we get to see them full blown, I think the one creature design, it's good.
They're basically extended translucent gill men.
Yeah, I like more when they actually open up their mouths and we can see that they have these, you know, distended jaws and tons of rows of teeth. And at one point, Kristen Stewart is swallowed by one, which is great.
Yeah, she swallowed like fucking Edgar when he swallows Tommy Lee Jones in Men in Black.
Yes. And that also has probably the best horror sequence in the movie, in which they're trying to get to, you know, like the final station that they need to get this door, and in front of them is just this sea of these creatures that seem to be sleeping or hibernating, and their long arms and claws are dangling and knocking into their helmets and stuff. I'm like, this is what I came for, baby.
Yeah, and it works really well. I mean, there are some practical creature elements early in the movie, but for the most part, the big sort of gillmen creatures, which look about, I don't know, 9 feet tall, something like that, if they were to stand up, they're big. There's this whole sort of big row, this big sea of them that's all sort of dangling arms and legs. And Kristen Stewart, you know, one has its palm of its hand directly on her helmet, and you see the palm of the hand just slowly slide up until the tips of the claws start touching the glass, and you can hear the claws in the glass. It's like, this is cool, man. This is what I signed up for.
Yeah, and then, of course, the bigger reveal that what these monsters are hanging from is a giant Cthulhu beast of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
That reveal that, what these things are hanging on is a larger creature, because at first I didn't realize that they were the creature. I thought they were going to be like the eggs or something of the smaller creature that we saw before, and it's like, okay, this is very Alien, you know, having to walk through a bunch of the eggs or something. But the reveal that these things are actually hanging on to a much larger kaiju creature was very, very cool. The actual design of the giant Cthulhu, I thought it was actually literally going to be Cthulhu. And that was going to be kind of the aha for dorks of the movie. Like, this was actually a straight up Cthulhu movie.
Mm-hmm.
But it's Cthulhu adjacent.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the Karathan from Aquaman. It looks like the Kraken from the remake of Clash of the Titans.
I said to you, it's like it's very kind of Cthulhu by way of a Pacific Rim uprising kaiju.
Sure, yeah, it's I think a little too Clash of the Titans for my taste, but overall, it's not a bad design.
No, I can see that creature in my head right now, which means it cut a good silhouette.
Sure, yeah. The fact that all of the smaller creatures burrow into its skin and use it as sort of a nest is like, ew, that's creepy. It's legitimately unsettling and creepy to think about. And this is an idea that came from an early draft of the script. The first drafts of the script were written on spec, meaning it was an original idea, by Brian Duffield. He's the same guy who wrote that Netflix movie, The Babysitter, And what's odd about this script is when it was shopped around Hollywood, it was essentially incomplete. It started at the second act in media res and really had no first act, barely any characterization to speak of, and it was way more high concept. It's like they all got their suits on, they leave. Most of the movie is the trek across the seafloor, and then they eventually get to this, kind of similar facility where the ending takes place. And it mentions that there's a big Leviathan creature with a whole bunch of smaller creatures hanging off of it. So you can see the bones of that idea, but I have to really give it to Adam Kozad for taking that first draft and turning it into something that is quite admirable. And it's not like Adam Kozad has an IMDb page full of like crazy good hits. It's like Jack Ryan, Shadow Recruit, and Legend of Tarzan, and Underwater. That's pretty much it.
No, I think the script is smartly streamlined. And for the big character payoff that we get set up with Nora, in the end, she sacrifices herself to let the other two members, Emily and was John Gallagher Jr.'s character?
Yep.
Liam.
Smith.
Yeah, Smith. And they have 3 escape pods, but only 2 of them are working, so she gets them to get in. And I love it. Was genuinely funny when they're having that, like, no, you got to go. No, you're good. I'm not going to, we can stay here and fix it. And Kristen Stewart just punches Emily and is like, I'm sorry. Like, that was really funny. and sets up her character to be like, okay, I'm this pessimist. I see things half empty, but I'm going to save these 2 because they're in a relationship and they love each other. Which I think all of that, their relationship in the movie, it's get ready to win a spot in GenreVision bingo. It's functional.
Yes, but I actually think they do a better job of characterizing these, this particular cast of characters way better than I anticipated. They're better at letting us into their headspaces than I had previously ever thought was possible in this particular project.
Well, like I say, functional does not mean bad. It works. It works. It's just, it works exactly as much as it needs to. And again, I think that this is a case of you need to hire good actors who will add something, that little bit of seasoning to it that'll work. And I think that's the case here. It's like, as written, it's functional. It does what it needs to do, but the actors help to give it that little kick.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ending being that the escape pods are escaping and the creatures are going to chase after them. And I mean, this was when I was like, look, if you think this movie isn't aware that it's riffing on Alien, how about you see that little sonar ping that is set up exactly like the devices in Aliens?
Sure.
It's right out of that book. So I'm like, yeah, it knows it and it's having fun with it. It's hugging those things tight to its chest and I love it. So Nora decides to detonate the core to kill the giant kaiju beast and all of its babies to save Liam and Emily. And with the voiceover, like I said, it's a little squiffy when she's like, let's light this shit up. I'm like, that's, you haven't been like that quippy and badass throughout the movie. There's actually some good banter with Kristen Stewart and TJ Miller and some other things where it's like, yeah, these talk like actual people, not just movie characters.
Yeah. Oh boy, you should have. I think I sent you some excerpts from the original draft by Brian Duffield. Like, the characters were nonstop quip machines and none of the quips were funny.
Yeah.
So Adam Kozad rewrote the dialogue extensively. A lot of dialogue work went into making this for the screen. So kudos for rewriting all of that. Yeah, it was quite a transformation from where this project started to the thing we got. But I had to ask myself an important question when it comes to evaluating this film critically for me, because the edit means a lot to me. And this is maybe just a personal thing because I'm, part of my job is to be an editor. I think way more about editing now than I ever did. And I think for me, we were talking about, like, is this an ambitious film? And, what does it aspire to? And does it accomplish those things? And that's usually the sort of yardstick that we use to judge a movie. For me, a film should have an ambition to be really well edited. And I think for this film to be really well edited and really well paced, it probably needed another 8 to 10 minutes of running time. I think it just needed to be padded out. It needed to breathe a little bit more. It needed moments to last. I had a similar issue with Rise of Skywalker. It's just like every moment is so brief that it really doesn't have much lasting power for me.
I don't disagree, but I can't judge the movie on kind of what it should be as to what it is.
I am evaluating for what it is. It's edited too damn tight.
I think I mean, again, I think that's you're very specifically keyed into that, because the only time that the edit really jumped out at me was specifically because you saw it before me, a scene that you mentioned where there's a great transition.
Yeah, Vincent Cassel is checking Nora's eyes, seeing if she has a concussion or a traumatic brain injury. And, we're doing that eyeline match where he's got the flashlight and it shines right into the lens. And we use a match cut to go to the outside, the exterior of the Kepler, where there's a big light out there. And there is a voiceover line from Vincent Cassel that was clearly recorded in post to patch over some sort of scene transition where he's like, no, I'm sending Nora down to the bridge to talk to so-and-so. And so, when we cut back, she's on the bridge talking to so-and-so, just like Vincent Cassel said. So I don't know what they lost there. A couple scenes, probably.
That was the only part of the edit where it was like, okay, all of a sudden these characters are here. We didn't really see how they got there. Obviously, we haven't been with the movie long enough to understand the geography and the structure of things. And really, the place that the movie starts at, they're going to leave as soon as possible. So the geography isn't necessarily as important. Mm-hmm. That was the only time that the edit kind of grabbed me.
But at least the movie made sure that the connective tissue was there so that we understood why a character was going to a certain place and why they appeared suddenly in a different location. The movie gave us a second to breathe. It cut to an exterior. That exterior shot was long enough for us to hear Vincent Cassel's character clearly state, I am sending you to blankety blank for this reason. And there it is. So, I'm glad that they actually put the thought into creating that connective tissue, even though it's like, okay, clearly something happened to those scenes, but I'm glad they patched it over and it's seamless otherwise.
But otherwise, I think Underwater is a really great example of taking a very simple idea, and an idea that we've seen executed countless times, but doing it with style and conviction and polishing the shit out of it. This is an incredibly polished movie, but at the end of the day, it is what I would call drive-in fodder.
Yeah, I mean, I think a too tight edit could be a symptom of over polishing. I think there's an incredible movie lurking behind a better edit, as I've said before. But the question that I had to ask myself last night as I was talking to you about this movie is like, is this a more promising movie than it is a good movie? And I was wrestling with that question a lot last night as I was sort of turning the movie over in my brain. And I have come down on the side that, hey, as it stands, it's a pretty decent flick. Is it a great B movie? I wouldn't say that. I think it's a B- movie right now with its technical problems, because the technical problems are not insignificant and they run through the whole movie for me. It's the bad sound mix, the music too fucking loud, and the edit too tight, and that's like pretty persistent through the entire 95-minute running time.
I think this is a very good movie, and if we had the exact same movie but the sound issue was fixed for me, because again, I don't have as big of an issue with the edit, I think I'd be close to calling it a great B movie. As it stands, I think the sound issue is so prominent, like you're saying, throughout. There's good moments where the sound mix is good, but there is a lot of it where it is just so overbearing and getting in the way of other things that are going on in the movie that's the biggest knock against the movie I can have. Otherwise, I think its intentions are totally met, and its intentions aren't enormous or grandiose. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to have those kind of movies, especially when you have them and they look this really, really, this is just a really fun movie to look at and imagine standing in the middle of.
Sure.
So I have to give it, I had a great time. I had a big smile on my face. The movie is never boring. And maybe that's a detriment for some people. Like they want a boring stretch for things to like
What the fuck are you saying to me?
Well, I'm not saying this specifically.
Travis wants a boring movie.
Well, no, it's not specifically you. It's that I think that, and I'm not saying this about you. I think this is going to be the case for a lot of people. The fact that the movie doesn't stop. It really doesn't stop. Like I said, even when we are having moments with the characters and they're doing things, it's still going. There's one moment in the movie where Nora gets to this abandoned shepherd station, and she's kind of there for a brief moment, and I was like, okay, this is the breather.
Well, this is like she's alone. It's the end of second act, low point going into the third, where she gets a second wind and decides that she's gonna try and really make it. But I thought the movie was sort of running on autopilot until while Nora is breaking down, taking a shower, the camera moves across this like corporate propaganda poster on the wall that says like always dive with a buddy. It's never safe to go alone, or some sort of something like that.
Well, it's like working alone is prohibited.
That's right. And I was like, oh man, this is doing it. I like that it's using these sort of corporate satirical elements, these posters on the walls to push home this sense of isolation and this character beat. It helps us feel what the character is feeling. The movie is full of good stuff like that. But yeah, there are technical issues that prevent me from, I think, falling in love with it like I wanted to.
But otherwise, I really think this, like you said, it scratched the itch. I think it's way better than it probably could have been for this kind of movie. Like there was a moment during the movie, I can't remember exactly when I was thinking about the bad version of this movie. And I have to say, I don't think it ever got to that point in the actual movie for me. I really had a great time. This kind of movie, I wish, we could see, because, seeing it, like you said, even before I think it was out, you're like, this proves that you can make an alien movie for $80 million or whatever. And I was like, yeah, but this is its own thing. Like it's original in the sense that it's not an established IP or using those elements. And I think I'd rather have that at this point, considering that for the rest of our lives, we're going to be inundated with nothing but total IP saturation at the movies.
Certainly. Yeah. I don't need the alien word in front of the movie or even those same creatures to have a really good, fun time that feels alien adjacent. Like it's these kinds of movies that I wish there were more of.
So I have to give Underwater a big recommendation. I think it will actually play to kind of wide audiences pretty well, because it has that momentum and it keeps things going, and it's a simple and recognizable enough story that people can kind of click into it real early on. And all of that is bolstered by a really strong cast, excellent production across the board, except in the sound mix. And I think it's just a really good little horror movie. That looks like $100 million.
So that's Underwater. I think if you enjoy movies of this kind, then you're doing yourself a disservice by skipping it. I also think you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you skip what we're going to recommend to you from the shelf.
So as always, we like to pick some movies that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And we always encourage you, loyal listener, to go to GenreVision.com and reply to the post for this episode with your own shelf picks. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Underwater?
This is a movie that I liked when I first saw it, and I wanted you to watch it. It took you a while to see it, but when you saw it, you weren't terribly hot on it. And it's a found footage movie. It's called As Above, So Below. And structurally, it's very, very similar to Underwater, where, as soon as it gets going, it's all about go, 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 go. There's always some sort of urgent problem to solve. And it's kind of similar in that it's very claustrophobic, underground tunnels, watery places that, people have to swim through and crawl through and come out on the other side, shades of The Descent. The Descent is a way better movie, But As Above, So Below is the right blend of like Tomb Raider and Blair Witch and Indiana Jones. Like, it has all of these influences, and I think it brings them together in a pretty attractive package that takes place all in the Paris catacombs. And there are some really fun supernatural elements to the film.
Well, for my shelf pick, I'm going to go ahead and do another aquatic horror and another seafloor movie. And one I revisited for the first time just the other night. This is Deep Star 6, directed by Friday the 13th Sean Cunningham. And I'm going to say it, I think Underwater is like the better version of Deep Star 6. Because Deep Star 6 is good. I enjoyed it. But it is got plenty of that slow, no excitement stuff going on as far as its attempt at building characters. I don't think the character work in Deep Star 6 is even as good as what's in Underwater.
God, no. But you see at least an attempt in Deep Star 6 to build some characters. You know, like the characters have some things going on in their lives.
Yes, there's one good character, and that's also bolstered by the fact that it's played by Miguel Ferrer.
Mm-hmm.
As the always fuck up character. But I think that Deep Star 6, it's another really handsome production. You know, it looks like the greatest Roger Corman movie Roger Corman never made. It's not got enough of its monster. I think that's its biggest problem, is the monster is kind of a non-entity for a lot of the movie.
Mm-hmm. And when it shows up, it's basically a giant slipper lobster.
Which, fine. I liked when the monster actually showed up and we got to see it, but clearly I'm sure that effect was a huge hassle, especially because they had to operate it in water.
Mm-hmm.
But I wish there was a little bit more of the monster in Deep Star 6, which that's not a problem in Underwater. There's just the right amount of monsters in that movie, with other problems that they have to solve. But a lot of Deep Star 6 is, you know, oh, we got to repressurize this, we got to patch this thing, with no real sense or presence of the monster. But even so, Deep Star 6, I enjoyed my time with it. I liked, you know, again, sitting in that space and feeling that pressure build as the movie went on. And it's not bad. I think it gets a worse rap than it actually deserves. I don't think it's a great movie, but it's not as low on the totem pole of this specific niche, I think, as people would say. So Deep Star 6, if you like these kind of movies, check it out. It's streaming on Prime right now.
Give it a shot. We
do have to do our shelf picks from the Rise of Skywalker episode. And of course, it's Star Wars, so we got a lot of responses, and you guys, as always, brought it, so I got to rattle these off real quick. Loyal listener Mark P's shelf pick was Back to the Future 3. Neil Tuzad had Justice League, which is, another third movie, actually. The always wonderful Ryan Covey had Avengers Endgame, which was also the shelf pick for Mr. Milksteak. Stephen Nesbella had Blade Trinity, which go listen to you can go listen to Third Time's the Charms episodes on Blade Trinity and Back to the Future 3. Eric Fuchs had Army of Darkness, which is a great third entry. Cthulhu Bob also said Avengers Endgame and Star Trek Nemesis, which loyal listener JT had Alien 3, which I think Alien 3 is a whole lot better than Rise of Skywalker, but that's just, me and Travis.
And Danny, we stand Alien 3 in this camp.
We do. Loyal listener Tim Langford had The Dark Knight Rises, which, again, you can go listen to Third Time's the Charm episodes on Dark Knight Rises and Alien 3. And loyal listener Pale Fire's shelf pick was Playing with All My Star Wars Toys in the 80s. So I think you can tell where his head was at with Rise of Skywalker. I'm very glad he enjoyed it. I love hearing all these shelf picks, and we always look forward to them. And I'm glad that they're increasing in number, that we're getting more and more shelf picks every week. So thank you all so much. Let's do some currently consuming. Nom, 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 nom. Travis, what's been on your plate?
For the new year, I treated myself. It had been a long time since I'd actually gotten able to splurge on an item that is frivolous, in a way that is I hadn't bought a new TV since fucking before Gravity came out. I think so. It was quite a while ago. And the last 3D I bought was a 40-inch Samsung 3D TV because like everybody thought 3D TVs were going to be like the new, the way of the future.
Oops.
That's dead. Yeah. Have fun trying to buy a 3D TV now. So I was like, all right, I know I'm going to watch one last 3D movie on this thing. Spoiler, it's for Finflix. And I bought a new TV. I bought a TCL 5 Series 50-inch, and it's a smart TV that runs on the Roku operating system.
Nice.
It is nice. There are some quirks about it, though. I picked it up on sale, a New Year's sale at Best Buy. It cost me $300, which for that TV I think is a pretty good price. But this is my first 4K TV, and it's my first HDR TV. And I really had no clue how HDR worked. 4K is easy enough to understand. It's just more pixels. So it's about four times more pixels than 1080p, which is, perfectly understandable to me. But I also understood that if I was going to benefit from seeing all those more pixels and getting that much more detail in 4K movies, then I would need something that was bigger than 40 inches. So I went with 50 inches. That's, not an insanely huge television. So HDR, however, kind of threw me for a loop because not only is there just like, a standard sort of HDR, there are others like Dolby Vision HDR. So there are different protocols of HDR, kind of like there are different ways to encode surround sound, whether it's like DTS or Dolby 5.1 or Dolby 7.1 or Dolby Atmos. Like there are all these different ways to decode HDR video signals. And the TV will automatically detect what kind of signal is coming from the media that's playing, whether it's coming from my PlayStation 4 or my Apple TV. Mm-hmm. And, for a while it's like, well, okay, I understand that this as a sort of budget HDR television is not going to be anywhere near as bright as like a 700 or 800 HDR television, which are the ones that actually get recommended. But I don't have $700 or $800 to fucking blow on a TV. So I had to get something that was going to be an upgrade from what I had, but also, wasn't going to break the bank. And so I started the process of like actually watching 4K HDR content on it. And most of that's going to be movies. One of the problems that we experience with current generation of televisions is motion smoothing. And there is an issue that people perceive called judder when they watch content of a lower frame rate than, say lower than 30 frames per second, lower than 48, lower than 60. People perceive, that there is sort of a stuttering or judder effect, like particularly if the camera pans too quickly or something like that. And so TVs decided, oh, well, this could be marketed as a problem and we could market a fix for this problem called motion smoothing. And for pretty much every TV on the market, there is some sort of default motion smoothing introduced. Now, TVs have a feature, every kind of digital display, whether it's, I think, LCD or LED or OLED, has a refresh rate. How many times the screen is going to refresh, and this is measured in hertz, as a frequency in hertz. And the standard refresh rate is like 60 in a lot of displays. Some are 120, some are 240. But they have the ability to take a signal from a movie, which runs at 24 frames per second, and match the refresh rate to the frame rate. And that's all lovely. However, I discovered that my television, if you match the frame rate of a movie at 24 hertz and 24 frames per second, it applies a little tiny bit of motion smoothing to it. And I'm like, son of a bitch.
Uh-oh.
It's not enough for me to want to return it because all I have to do is go into the menu on whatever device that I'm watching a movie on and turn off that match frame rate option and actually have it show me the movie at 60 hertz, and it doesn't turn on the motion smoothing. It actually looks better when I don't match the refresh rate because it doesn't apply that like movie mode where it thinks, oh, we have to motion smooth this a little bit because movies are wrong. Fuck you. Movies look right. And movies look especially right when the studios don't fuck with them. One of the most horrendously fucked with movies on its way to 4K and HDR was Terminator 2. They remastered this for theatrical release in 4K. And not only did they upscale it, they made it larger. This came from, this was shot in Super 35 in the 90s, so it was grainy. It was supposed to be grainy. It's fucking Super 35. So they then took a machine learning, software that scrubbed all of the film grain from it while enhancing and adding artificial details. It's added things like pores on people's skins in close-up that weren't even photographed. So it's adding artificial detail to make it look new. This is heinous. This is a crime. This is a criminal crime. You should go away.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll talk about that more on a Patreon episode. I know that's been something we wanted to tackle in regards to that. We will just say that there's a great website out there, Capsaholic, that's caps-a-holic.com, where you can compare releases of movies that they could put out on physical media, and it's become an invaluable resource for Travis and I.
Yeah, because sometimes companies, when they do an HDR or 4K release of a movie, they do a really shitty job of upgrading that print to a 4K digital scan.
Yeah, that T2 one is, like you said, it's one of the worst I've ever seen.
They didn't just do a bad job of like, oh, yeah, we didn't put a whole lot of effort into this master. No, they put a ton of effort into making it look like digitized garbage. It looks like shit. They also gave it a whole new color grade. The movie looks so different. It's real ugly. Anyway, but then you get to see reference shots from like Ang Lee's The Hulk. For whatever reason, that got an upgrade to 4K that looks incredible. Like they just did a much higher res scan of the original elements. It looks awesome.
I did that when we did our episode on Ang Lee's Hulk. I watched the 4K disc release, and I'm certain that beautiful job they did is part of the reason I kind of sort of fell in love with that movie.
It's a good looking movie. Anyway, that is my 4K HDR experience. How have you been doing with the currently consuming stuff? Have you been consuming a lot? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm going to talk about a video game. I didn't do any kind of best of the decade stuff when that was all going on, because it's just too much to sift through and something that I know I'll forget and feel bad about. But if I was going to pick a game of the decade for me, I think one of the most serious contenders would be Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight was a kickstarted game that was, very deliberately trying to be retro, taking inspiration from stuff like Mega Man and DuckTales on the NES and all this stuff. And the original Shovel Knight was an absolute blast of a game. It looks gorgeous too, because it does a lot of things that the era it's emulating would not be able to technically do, with the color palette on screen, with stuff like parallax scrolling. It was a gorgeous game. And Yacht Club Games, the developer, did the most wonderful thing, in which if you buy Shovel Knight, you instantly, and it's, way cheaper than most, whatever $70 AAA games, whatever the price was for it. I think it was $30. You got all of the additional DLC that they were making totally free. If you bought the game, that meant you had all the versions of the game that they were going to put out. And what they did was, there are basically 4 campaigns now for the game. And the main one, which was just the regular game at first, and then 3 other kind of remixes of the formula where you play as 3 of the different villains that you would fight in the original version of the game. And they just last month released the last one, which was King of Cards. And it's so incredible, and it's such a testament to them building a really good architecture for this game system, that they were able to riff around with it and create totally different play styles for all the different campaigns. Each character that you play has very unique ways of approaching the levels. And in turn, then that meant that each different campaign has different level design to suit the way that each of the individual characters play. There's also a whole bunch, like in this new one, King of Cards, which I'm just near the end of. There's a in-game card game that the characters are playing, called Joustus, which is wonderfully, it's like the best kind of things where the rule set is exceedingly simple, but within that it's able to create a lot of different variations in the cards that you get and stuff. And I'm never crazy about that kind of stuff in games, because I think most of the time it's not developed well enough, whatever the rule set for those kind of things are. But in this one, it's very, very deceptively simple and really fun. Probably my favorite in-game card game since Final Fantasy IX's Tetramaster.
Well, I'm lost in jargon here.
Oh, sure, this is all deep nerd pull stuff, but just like Shovel Knight, it's a game that exudes joy, like in the color scheme and the characters and the dialogue and the world. It is just so joyous, and playing it always it's just like, no matter how frustrated I get with, a certain part of the game, I always feel really happy, and there's always fun little pieces of text or new characters or enemies that show up in a level that I'm like, wow, that's a really fun design, or the way that I have to try and approach this enemy to defeat them is really fun. I think Shovel Knight might have been my favorite game of the decade, because they continue to just release brand new versions of it that you got for, you didn't have to buy a season pass or something.
Yeah, I tried playing Shovel Knight with former co-host Nick Murray. Too hard for me.
Oh yeah, I mean that's my niche with gaming, is like I like that kind of retro stuff with a certain level of difficulty. And more so, I really love those kind of games that teach you how to play the game by playing the game, not with a whole bunch of tutorial messages that pop up and overloading you with, button commands and stuff that you have to try and memorize. And the games, a lot of modern games know you're not able to memorize that, so they will continually show you how to do that stuff on the screen.
Show me how to put my hat back on, Red Dead.
Right, exactly. Whereas Shovel Knight, it's the best kind of, it teaches you how to play the game through its level design. It doesn't have to pop up and be like, oh, look, here's a cliff. Well, to get over the cliff, press the A button and hold up or whatever. It's like, no, it has faith in your intelligence as a person who understands simple pattern recognition to be able to understand, like, oh, okay, this is how I traverse this part of the level. This is some new mechanic or gimmick that's going to be unique to this level. How do I have to operate it? How do I have to overcome it? I love that stuff, and I really just have such a good time with it. So I know, like, for some people, that kind of gaming is just not what their kind of formative experience with gaming was, or was something that they sunk enough time into to have a deep familiarity with it. But for people who do like that kind of stuff, I think Shovel Knight's one of the achievements of the decade. And this new one, King of Cards, I'm having a real fun time with. So check it out. All right, let's end things with our
Comment of the week.
And we had 2 episodes since we've, done this. We did the Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, and then also our top 15. And you guys had so many great comments. The Rise of Skywalker one, we knew we were going to get a lot of responses because Star Wars, but you guys had some really great comments. And same with the top 15. I love hearing people's top other movies of the year and top other categories that we got a lot of responses. But I did want to highlight an email we got for our Q&A episode. This is from loyal listener Caroline. And she says, I've been listening for a long time now, back when y'all were the Drew reviews. That is a long time ago. A couple years ago, when I was searching for reviews of Fateful Findings on YouTube, I stumbled upon the video Travis made. Watched it, cried laughing for 20 minutes, showed all my friends. That episode, and I cannot stress this enough, is the single funniest thing I have ever witnessed, which, wow, thank you. I played the video at a Christmas party a couple years ago, and people loved it so much we put Faithful Findings on afterward. If I ever feel down, I watch or listen to any of the Neil Breen episodes to feel better, so I just want to say thank you both for helping me through some rough times. There's a whole lot more to this, in which Caroline talks about getting one of her best friends to listen to the show, that they have deeper discussions about the movies. They're huge fans of the Neil Breen episodes. It's given them a deeper appreciation for Neil Breen, and they can't wait for the rest of the Breen episodes for us to do. This is I went to see Hereditary with this friend that she introduced it to, only because I listened to the Hereditary episode to spoil everything so I wouldn't be too scared. Was still scared, but didn't cry or have nightmares, so that was big personal growth win for me. When we got this email, I hope you're listening, Caroline, because it just put so much pep in our step.
It would totally suck if she saw underwater in the feed and was like, eh.
Right. Oh, no, I mean, if she's not, it's still incredibly humbling and awe-inspiring and wonderful to hear something like our Fateful Findings video played at a Christmas party.
I think that's the opposite of humbling. I mean, that's exalting. I mean, humbling is, I got showed up today by somebody who did a way better job than me. I'm humbled. No, I'm the opposite. This is awesome. This kicks ass, Caroline. Thank you.
It's absolutely incredible, and I hope Caroline's listening, because next week we are continuing the Neil Breen filmography with the last Neil Breen movie for now. I pray it's not the last Neil Breen movie ever. I hope he continues to make movies till the end of time.
We might have to throw him a couple bucks in his next Indiegogo to make sure that happens, but we'll see.
But we will be closing out our journey for the time being with Neil Breen's Twisted Pair next week. So I hope you and your friend will be along for the ride, Caroline. Thank you so much again. And thank you, loyal listener, for tuning in. And as always, I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Underwater.